Do good work is not a label, but a way of living. It is the constant and diligent effort to achieve a new level of excellence in one's own life. It is the hidden inner beauty behind the struggle to achieve excellence. It's not perfect, but imperfect. It is the effort, discipline, and focus that often goes unnoticed. The goal of Do Good Work is to highlight that drive. The guests I have on this show emulate this drive in their own special way. You'll be able to apply new ideas into your own life by learning from them. We will also have one-on-one episodes with me where we'll dive into my own experience with entrepreneurship and leadership. Every episode is designed to provide you with ideas that you can apply and grow in excellence in all areas of your life, business, and career.
Today on the podcast, we have Sudha Ranganathan. With over 15 years of experience in marketing organizations, Sudha has worked with companies like P&G, Nielsen, and PayPal. She's currently on the brand marketing team at LinkedIn, where she gets to help develop a world-class brand in the talent space. She's an active volunteer with the Mindfulness and Compassion team over at LinkedIn, is undergoing coaching certification through CTI, and is mastering interpersonal and organizational skills through the Inner MBA program. She's on a mission to help create a world of work where business leaders and teams recognize the importance of self-mastery, interpersonal mastery, organizational success, and emotionally intelligent teams, and how those contributors can help drive business success. Well, Sudha, thank you so much for being on today.
It is my pleasure to be on today, and I'm glad our paths crossed for us to be here together.
No, it's wonderful how that happens, right? Just doing some preliminary research and just like when we started to talk to each other and then learning a little bit more about you and even on your profile, like we share some common values when it comes to self-mastery, but also when you talk about interpersonal relationships and how that can be a focus of mastery. That can be a focus of how we relate to others, how we support others, our emotional intelligence, et cetera. And that's beyond the workplace. But then you attach that to the organization's success and then to the actual business success, which I think is a beautiful hierarchy of saying, hey, it's not just one person, it's not just one initiative, it's all these things working together. And with your experience, especially with the marketing world, I have to ask you and start with this one question. And I know I led up to this, but this is a very important question I'd love to know. How would you define marketing?
You know, there are questions that are so seemingly deceptively simple and yet are really powerful. I guess I would define marketing as helping an end consumer or an end customer understand how someone can help get their needs met. It's really as simple as that. The focus is very much on the customer, the consumer, and what they need, and on bridging the gap between what you can offer and what they need, and doing it in a simple, effective, consistent way over time.
And I really appreciate you answering that. And I know that it was like an interesting start to the conversation, because I know that for some, marketing might seem the other way around, but you start with the customer first. You always have customer centric and then bridging our products or services to meet those specific needs. So it's kind of like working backwards. How does one go from identifying those needs and working backwards as opposed to saying, I'm starting with a product, let me find a need?
It is tempting, especially in technology companies, but also in companies that have great R&D teams, to be really excited about something new that you've discovered that your product can do, and to be able to go out there and talk about it. What it leads to, however, is you talking about something that you're so personally excited about, and you haven't bothered to figure out how that connects to the customer's life journey or the jobs that they're trying to get done. And there are some common mishaps and examples of that in the categories that I've worked on that I can speak to later. Mm-hmm. But I think those lessons have taught me that the reframing is really important, which is you start with where the customer is. You start with how their life intersects with the category that you're operating in. And you look at those intersection points and the jobs that they're trying to get done along those intersection points, and you go, what can I offer them at those points that would help their needs get met, or would help them get that job done? And I find that when you reframe it that way, Not only does it help you position an existing product much more powerfully, it also gives you really great ideas on adjacent products that you can launch to address other allied jobs that need to get done along that same life cycle.
That's interesting. So being able to do the research, but also get data from the actual end user and how they're actually using the product or service, what's lacking, what other opportunities may arise, and then from there deriving either through R&D or through their launching something new or positioning that existing solution to solve those existing needs. Because there's products that where it's going to do one thing and it's going to do it right. But there's also some other products which like a black box where it can do almost everything.
Right.
And then you don't know what that everything can be. And it can be kind of hard to juggle. So if we're focusing like with product marketing and for product marketers to be able to understand this, like where should they start? What's the best place for them to start?
Yeah, so let's split up that answer into two parts. One is, what is in it for product marketers and where should they start in influencing the product roadmap? Because that tends to be their remit. But we should also talk a little bit about go-to-market marketers, like people in brand or sales enablement, and where they can start to try and position what they already have as a product in the right way. So let's talk about product marketers and driving the product roadmap. I think a really great place to start is to ask yourself, do I have an expansive enough definition of the category? Right. So let's say I was a product marketer at Coca-Cola or a product marketer at Apple. I picked those two examples for a very specific reason. Like one is very layman, consumer-oriented. The other is a little more tech-savvy. When Coca-Cola asked themselves, do we have an expansive enough definition of the category? They went to, no, we've been defining the category as aerated, caffeinated drinks. When in fact, the category, if you are to really expand it through the consumer's lens, is any time that I need to put anything liquid into my body. Okay, why not expand it from that to any time I need to put anything in my body, liquid or solid? And suddenly you now have like a whole spectrum of use cases and jobs to be done that, caffeinated beverages fit into some of those use cases, but now you have a bunch of other beverages, including water, that fit a bunch of those other jobs. And then you have snacks, and it just goes on. And the end is only wherever they decide to cut off their brand umbrella and they feel like they're stretching it too far. Similarly, with Apple, if a product marketer were to ask themselves, how am I defining the category in an expansive enough way? And they started with the iPhone. And then you ask yourself, well, what are the other jobs that people do with that iPhone, around that iPhone? And that's how they came up with AirPods, for example. That's how they came up with a bunch of other devices that support the iPhone ecosystem. So I'd say the first place to start is, am I defining my category in an expansive way? And the next question to ask is, once I've defined it in that expansive way, what are the jobs that my consumer is trying to get done with that category? And the final question is, am I addressing all of those needs along that life cycle? So that's a product marketer. But for a go-to-market marketer, the question is slightly different. The question is, I already have a product and I want to go to market with that product. And a great place to start is, what are all of the jobs that the customer is trying to get done that this product could actually help with? So here's a really great example. And this is a particularly relevant example for any new category launches. So Febreze is an example of a fabric freshener that P&G launched many, many years ago. And when they first launched it, it was rather unsuccessful, much to their disappointment, because it was a great technology. But like you said a little bit earlier, people just didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
Fabric freshener, I don't know what to do with that. And P&G quickly pivoted to what we call a jobs to be done or a use case-based marketing. And they said, where in the customer's life do they need to refresh fabrics? And why do they need to do that? And suddenly they stumbled upon this amazing insight, which is anything that you cannot launder but picks up odors over time is a perfect use case for Febreze. And so that took them to shoes and sneakers, cushion covers and pillows and couches, curtains. And they started to feature all of those in their marketing, and immediately Febreze sales just took off. So from a go-to-market marketer's standpoint, the question is, which of the customer's needs can this product meet, and what other jobs can it help them get done, so I can feature those in my marketing.
It always ends with the customer, but I love that you focused on with product marketing to find the edges where is the category's edges, and how is this current solution meeting those needs at that edge? And if we go a little bit further, what's on the outskirts of that? What's happening in no man's land, right? So that's really interesting looking at it that way. And also with the Fabrice example as well, is like also understanding, like I remember reading the book of habits, is like understanding, well, what are our customers' actual habits? And Febreze was more like a pleasantry to do after you cleaned, to feel like you've completed your room cleaning. And I still love the product. So that's really interesting. So starting there, there's a difference between an assertion saying, I know my customer needs this, or I know they're going to need X, Y, and Z based on data. But then there's also, the back end of a hypothesis of saying, hey, I don't know, but I'm suggesting this might be a solution, as opposed to saying, hey, this is going to be the solution. How do we work within our teams, work within both, and be able to take one and take action upon them?
I'm going to ask you to restate that question so I understand what we're trying to get.
Absolutely. So like let's say we're going on the outskirts of product marketing and finding the edges. And then we're looking at, hey, our customers looks like they need this. And we can either make a hypothesis and start testing around that, or we can make an assertion and start creating product to fit those needs. How do we balance the both?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think it's a question that applies to pretty much all of product development, and not just product development at the edges of a category.
Mm-hmm.
There is no perfect answer, but I would say it's got to be really good balance of the two, right? So this is where I think user design and product design research and the worlds of user experience research sort of intersect, which is you start to frame up what are the problems that the customer is trying to solve, or the jobs they're trying to get done. And then you generate hypotheses or ideas on how you could solve those jobs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
This is where you get into things like medium, format, what they call form factor in technology, etc. You develop your ideas. And I think this is when a customer is going to be ready to react. So if you're able to take some of those ideas back to your customer and have them react to some of them, and if you're also able to visualize how these fit into the flow of the customer's life, rather than having to introduce a brand new set of actions in the customer's life,
Mm-hmm.
could it fit into the flow of their existing life? But I do think it starts with an internal team ideating on possibilities. That internal team zeroing in from those possibilities to a few viable options to test with customers based on some clearly defined guiding principles, like, does this help the customer get the job done? Does this fit within the flow of their existing work, rather than trying to create new habits for the customer? And so you zero down your ideated list, then you take it back to customers. And I think that touch point with customers is incredibly important, rather than directly jumping at the assertion that I think this is the right solution. So yeah, I think that just like with emotional intelligence, there is that right balance of humility and confidence with product development as well. I think there is that right balance of humility and confidence. Confidence that I've ideated on the right list, but the humility to go, I don't know what the right answer is, and I need to go back and check it with the customer.
I'm going to restate that, because I think that was really, really valuable for us to just go around again. Having the emotional intelligence to understand the humility of what our customers actually, and being able to listen. I think that is extremely important. And I don't want to jump the gun and start talking, how do we develop this in our teams? But I also do have to ask, like, when do we know, like when we're doing these tests, when is the right time to actually pivot and either scrap an idea, change, or just change by 1 degree slightly? So when is enough for us to pivot? Because we don't want to go down too much down the road and be too late, but also we don't want to do it too early.
So let's answer that first piece first, because I will tell you, I set a very high bar coming from a research background for when an idea needs to be scrapped or pivoted. And to me, that bar is if a customer isn't going, I love that. That really does something for me. So unless you're getting this delightful reaction, anything less than that is just not good enough. So I remember going into research many, many years ago, and we were trying to start this idea for a new skincare product. And customers were like, yeah, maybe I would use that. Yeah, I would use that. And we came back and I went, yeah, it sounds like it's a good idea. And my manager said, so that they were just being polite. And it was an Asian market, so culturally they prone to being even more polite than a lot of other cultures. Yeah, and that idea didn't do very well when we launched it in the market either. So a mere reaction is not good enough. Them saying, yeah, this sounds good, not good enough. What you want is utter shock and delight at your idea. That's when you know they're going to be motivated out of the inertia of status quo to actually go change and incorporate this into their lives. So that's in the research context. You're looking for delightful reactions, nothing less than that. In the context of the real life world, once you've launched your product, it's a little more of an elaborate answer, but you have to think about what are the various levers that help a product succeed in market. And there are many more levers than just the product itself, right? So there are a bunch of levers like, have you gotten it? Are you driving penetration into the market in all of the right ways? Meaning, is there enough awareness? Does the product enjoy the right perceptions in market? Is it available and accessible? So is it distributed well enough? So those are all of the levers of consumption and volume growth. And if you haven't hit on those levers, then it's too early to be scrapping the product, because what it means is people either don't know, are not compelled by, or haven't reached your product just yet. But if you feel like all of those three hypotheses, people are aware, people perceive it strongly, and people can reach it if they want to. If those three things are true, and yet your product isn't doing well, then I think it's worth going back to customers and talking to them about how they feel about the product. So actually getting reactions on product usage and product delivery, understanding what the competitive set is. Are they comparing it to something else? Is it falling short competitively? Or is it just falling short in absolute terms? Only then do I recommend that you move to scrap or pivot the product. But you have to examine all of the go-to-market levers before you conclude that the product is your problem.
And I like how you distinguish that, because in the research, it's very high. It's a high bar. Does this delight my customer, as opposed to just like a meh reaction, which I think is a good way for us to even gauge if we're doing, research or discovery initially with product, but also being able to not scrap it without enough KPIs of the awareness, the perception, the volume, and making sure that we have enough data and qualitative data and enough data for us to say, hey, this is significant for us to make a decision and to act on before we actually scrap. And I know that that's in itself is more like this is a strategy of how to go about doing this, as opposed to, oh, it's going to happen in, 45 days. And that's not really true, because you can accumulate data at different volumes and at different, touch points. So you can't just say at one point is better over another. But I think having this framework is easier for us to understand what are the actions that are necessary for us to actually assess, discuss, qualify, and then seeing what the next strategic moves are. So discussing around forming hypothesis, understanding how we're going to find edges, understanding how we're going to, pivot, change. This all takes place. This can be done by one person, but the organizations that you work with, it's not. It's very important for us to build winning teams to do this. And I'd love to know from your perspective, what are the ingredients necessary within a team to actually facilitate and execute this, not only efficiently, but successfully?
Well, so here, first of all, I'm going to borrow inspiration from a really great book that I was introduced to a few years ago. It's called The Culture Code. It's by Daniel Coyle. And not to give too much away, because I'd love to encourage people to buy the book and read it in detail. But what you'll find on Daniel Coyle's website is what I'm going to tell you right now. There are three components to what make teams work really well together. And notice how I say teams work really well together, and how I don't say get really high-performing people into teams, because I don't think those two things are one and the same. So a collection of high-performing people does not a high-performing team make.
Can we say that one more time? I love that. A collection of superstar people does not equal a superstar team.
Absolutely. Just like a marriage with two stellar individuals does not mean it's going to be a great marriage, because so much of the magic of any relationship, marriage, friendship, teams, lies in the interactions between those people. And so what I think Culture Code does really well as a book is it codifies three overarching principles that need to be true for teams to do really well together. So I'm just going to articulate what those three principles are. And again, I'm going to state, I'm borrowing this from Daniel Cohen's book, Culture Code. These are not my original ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Number one is this notion of psychological safety, which is that everybody on the team feels safe and they feel heard and they feel like there is an environment where they can speak up and not be punished in any way. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Number two principle is vulnerability. It is creating a team environment where starting with the leader down to everybody else, but usually starting with the leader who sets the tone, is willing to indulge in vulnerability, is willing to sometimes have the humility to say, you know what, that was not a great decision. And I'm going to tell you why it was not a great decision and what I'm going to learn from that decision so I don't make that mistake again. And the third is what Daniel Coyle calls purpose, which is the sense of why are we all here together and what are we working towards. And the more you can clarify and shed light on that purpose, and the more you can keep re-articulating it in inspiring ways to your people, the more there's a North Star that everybody is moving towards together. And you can have great psychological safety, you can have great vulnerability, but if you're not moving towards one direction, then what's the point of it all? So I'd say that those to me have always stuck with me as the three key ingredients of high-performing teams. Psychological safety that creates the room for everybody to belong, to speak up without fear of repercussions. And this is how great ideas are created, by the way. So if you think about like Disney Pixar, if you've ever watched the making of any of their movies, so I watched the making of Frozen 2, for example, which is just an outstandingly good movie. But the number of iterations they go through, getting feedback from studio producers, from audiences, etc., and the number of times they have to scrap and rewrite portions, it's a lot of work, and it's really scary each time. But there is this feeling of psychological safety that if someone's providing critique on my idea, it's not because they hate me as a person, it's because they want this to be better. And that's just now imbued into their DNA, which is why they produce great movies over time. Vulnerability, I think everybody knows about this, but I only understood how important it was and how important it is for senior people to role model that. So junior people in the team can also be inspired and role model that. Because admitting mistakes is a really big part of course correcting when something is going wrong. Purpose is also kind of self-evident, but yeah, having a North Star, shining a constant light on it, over-communicating it as much as you possibly can. So everybody always knows why they're showing up at work and they feel inspired to do their best. Yeah.
I love that. And when you've seen this like in play within your teams or your marketing departments, like how have you seen these, kind of manifest themselves within your organization, and how have you been able to almost cater or support these principles so that they're actually being practiced or followed upon? Because I know that's also part of the role, is like just making sure like, oh, go and do your marketing work or go do your work today, but it's more like let's facilitate actual intentional work and interactions and engagement with the team.
That is such a good question, because it's one thing for me to say you should do all these things, and it's a whole other question to go, well, how do I do it? For psychological safety, I found that the single most important thing is for the leader to set the tone, that whenever critique is provided, they encourage and appreciate it, helping everybody else realize that you will face that same consequence if you speak up, which is that you will be appreciated, you will be thanked for providing that feedback, rather than I go into avoidance mode, I start fighting you, or I freeze in place and I don't know what to do. So really role modeling, embracing negative feedback with humility, and appreciating those people in public forums is going to give everybody the courage to know that they can speak up whenever they need to. So I think that is probably the single biggest one for psychological safety. I think another part of psychological safety is this notion of inclusion and belonging. It's a big conversation right now in the context of racial diversity. However, I think it matters in the context of neurodiversity, for example. So let's say you're a highly introverted individual, and you're prone to needing more time to think before you respond to stimulus, and you're brought into a team that's full of these really talkative, loud, extroverted people. As a manager, my job is to ensure that your voice is always heard and you feel really safe speaking up. And what that means is sometimes quieting the chaos around us of all of these structured people to say, hey, person X, I'd really love to know what you think. And calling upon you and creating those environments. So I'd say those are the two key ingredients for psychological safety. Reward people who provide constructive criticism, do it publicly to encourage others, and encourage diversity within your team and foster a culture of inclusion and belonging by bringing diverse people in and giving them a space to feel like they're really part of that. With vulnerability, I'd say that the single most important thing is, again, the leader has to role model vulnerability. With every chance that I get, I articulate to my team if I feel like I made a misstep or a poor decision. I apologize and take responsibility for my actions without making any excuses. And I continue to tell them that I'd like to hear if I do this ever again, but I want them to hold me accountable. And I've noticed that the more I do it, the more my people do it. So I'd say for vulnerability, leadership role modeling is a really big one. With purpose, I think for the I keep going back to leader because I do think leaders carry a greater responsibility for all of this. With purpose, I think being able to distill down with utter clarity and consistency, why do we exist as a team? And what is our unique contribution to the larger business ecosystem? That is a very, very important thing to understand. So people know why this team matters uniquely from every other team in the organization. And I'd say that to over-communicate it is the second part of my advice on purpose. So you've distilled it down with clarity and consistency, capture it somewhere so people can access it really easily, and then find every opportunity to repeat it and keep connecting the team's work streams back to their North Star purpose so they feel constantly inspired to keep moving towards that purpose. So those, I would say, are some of the how-tos to imbibe each of these into your work.
No, and thank you for sharing that. And on the last piece as well, I think it's important to not only, you said overstate it, and also tie it back to the overall company mission or how they're actually making a difference, but also having them believe that they're making a difference. And I think that in that part, that does take practice, not just a one-time deal. And that's very important to be able to not just motivate, but also have them see that there is a future, their work's making an impact, they make a difference, and they are unique in their and how they're working together. And bringing this back to like what you mentioned when we talked about earlier is that, the interpersonal mastery. And I love how you put that, because I haven't met someone who've actually said, I want to not just do self-mastery. Everyone wants self-mastery, right? But interpersonal mastery is extremely important as well. And this is kind of the heavy lifting that we have to go through within teams to be able to make sure everyone is heard, make sure that we understand that they know that they're heard, that they feel safe around this, and that we also work together to achieve a common goal, and that we're making progress. And that is, it's easier saying it here on the podcast than actually executing it. But I think that's very important there. But well, Sudha, I really did love our conversation today. For our listeners out there, what's the best place for people to thank you for this episode and reach out to you?
Well, messaging me on LinkedIn is a really good place to start. So, if you can post my LinkedIn profile, which would be totally fine now, they can reach out to me through a direct message on LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to respond.
Wonderful. I'll put your link on LinkedIn on the show notes. And Sudha, thank you again.
Thank you for having me, Rahul. It was such a delightful conversation.